The secret to crack CAT is taking a lot of mocks. We at Krakow give all the previous year's CAT, XAT and IFT papers in the actual exam format. Also, if you just Google Krakow free CAT mock, you can find 3 free CAT mocks in the latest exam pattern. You can take them and get detailed analysis.
Hi guys, welcome to Krakow. Many of you guys, you have been asking us how do I improve my reading speed, my comprehending speed, my VARC score. You have been telling this consistently. There is no shortcut. You got to improve your reading abilities by organically building it. You got to read every day. But again, there are two categories here. The first category is if you do not have the habit of reading, get distracted very easily. You can't read books for too long. It's not so good, even from CAT perspective, neither from a long-term perspective. So you got to start building that habit. You got to start somewhere. Best place to start are fiction novels, especially those of Dan Brown, Jeffrey Archer, very good authors. If you are looking for an Indian author, The White Tiger by Arvind Adiga, that's a pretty good place to start. The second category of students would be if you have been reading for some time, you are quite comfortable with reading, and especially you are not scared away by lengthy, complicated RCs, then you can specifically prepare on individual topics. Aeon is an amazing bunch of library. You can find all sorts of topics. Even Smithsonian is very good. You see all sorts of topics, especially for current affairs. You can look up New York Times, Guardian. You can look up Economist for business and economics, Scientific American for science related RCs, technology related RCs. There are many other magazines you can go through. All of this more or less have CAT level or better English, and also you are improving holistically here. Apart from building capacity in range of topics, capacity in handling different genres of topics, your current affairs is improving, the way you think is improving, you're improving holistically. But again, there is a caveat here. If you are not well versed in reading, if you do not have a habit of reading, very easily you will get distracted and you will stop. There won't be any continuity. It's better to start off with fiction novels where you have very smooth continuity. If we broadly categorize the different topics, different genres of slot 1 and slot 2, we had one scientific RC based on emperor penguins, and even in slot 2 we had one on natural sciences, efficiency of squatter cities. We had one on business. Here this was efficiency, slightly related to economics. It was commonality of history, culture, arts, culture. We also saw one humanities passage from both. So more or less we can classify into different buckets. But if you want to specifically improve in each of these genres, where do you do it? How do you do it? One places you can go to these and specifically search for them. That's quite arduous. That is why we have designed the daily target in a very scientific way. Every day we put out one test on VARC, broadly categorized into one of these genres. They have the video solution. We also put out one article that is curated by the faculty. Fantastic read. You go through it so that you avoid the hassle of looking for these specific articles which can help you. So if you don't have the patience of going through, you can check the daily target or the batch feed, and slowly, consistently you can improve every day. Today we'll be looking at scientific RC. These two are taken from the daily target so that you get a sense of how the daily target works. Let's look at two scientific RCs today. Good luck.
This is a beautiful passage on sustainability. I loved reading it. Let's begin. In order for sustainability to become a reality, human needs to make a quantum shift in consciousness, a shift in thinking of human beings as singular entities to understanding our plurality, a shift away from greedy selfishness and towards inclusive generosity. Presently, most people are motivated by me rather than we. This self-centered mindset is destroying our planet. Resources are being depleted at an alarming rate, and the future of the planet looks increasingly big. We are at a tipping point. For our world to become sustainable, humanity must join together globally and unite in its efforts to introduce truly sustainable practices. This unification begins with each individual realizing they are an important part of the macrocosm. Macrocosm means it is a whole of a complex system. There is a complex system. Each individual will contribute towards that macrocosm. Whole of complex system, you can say, whole of a complex system, and that their efforts do make a difference. This is a very simple read. easy to understand. So he's talking about how people should make a quantum shift in consciousness. He says we need to move away from greedy selfishness and become more inclusive, more generous. And he says that currently we are depleting our resources. Resources are being depleted at alarming rate. He says we are at a tipping point. So he says currently the environment is at a crisis. That is what he is saying. Currently we have an environmental crisis. And then he says that we need to transform. Every person should make a quantum shift in consciousness. We should become more inclusive and generous. The way we think should change. If each of us change, then that will lead to a nationwide or global wide transformation. That is what he is saying. This is individual transformation. If each of us transform the way we think, the way we act, it will lead to a sustainable world. That's what he is saying here. This will lead to truly sustainable practices. This will lead to a sustainable world. This is the essence of the first paragraph. Sustainable world. Let's look at the second paragraph. Meeting the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations is sustainability. So he's defining what sustainability is here. So tomorrow's needs should not be compromised. We utilize resources accordingly so that even our children have it. That is sustainability. It has three pillars: economic, environmental and people, each of whom can either contribute or detract from the goal of establishing human ecosystem equilibrium. This term is just paraphrasing sustainability. So in first para we saw that how we need to make a quantum shift. He says that we need to become inclusive, generous, we need to unite together in order to follow sustainable practices. And then he says that this sustainability, it has three pillars. One is economic, one is people and environment. All of this can either contribute or also detract from sustainability. So that is what human ecosystem equilibrium. He is just paraphrasing. He is saying in order to become sustainable, all these three pillars are necessary. We can summarize that point by saying that each pillar necessary towards becoming sustainable is necessary towards. Let's continue. One such example is a communal piece of land in upcountry Moi, where people grow their own food, generate sun and wind energy and share community meals and chores. So he is giving an example of how sustainability will look like. So communal piece of land means a land which is owned by an entire community. An individual doesn't have ownership to any piece of land within that territory. The entire community owns that land. And he says that in this community, Maui is a place in Hawaii. So he says in this community, people share their own food, they generate sun and wind energy, so they are using renewable resources and they do everything united. Then one member shared that universal currency could potentially support sustainability rather than defeat it. Another shared that Tesla's discovery of a low-cost way of wirelessly transmitting electricity was never developed due to economic interests. So these people, two of them, let's say in upcountry Moi, one person said that the universal currency, all of us have the same currency, it will contribute towards making a sustainable world. And then one more person says that Tesla invented a cheaper way of wirelessly transmitting electricity, but this was never developed because of economic interest. So it is showing how people are motivated by selfish motives. They have economic interest in mind. Their principles of simple lifestyles and mindful consumption make for a very light carbon footprint. They are living examples of affecting the three pillars in a positive way. Say all the three pillars, they can either contribute towards sustainability or detract from the goal of sustainability. Here this community, they are all contributing, they are affecting it in a positive way. Okay. Let's look at the third paragraph. Yet the fact remains that this little farm is an exception rather than a rule. Many people, as their incomes rise, automatically adjust their consumption accordingly. They purchase bigger cars, houses, trips, toys, etc. We have set the example for the world, and as third world country grows rapidly developed, they too are becoming more soul sick, buying and consuming more and more without any thought of the environmental costs. So here the author is very critical about our consumption behavior. He says that all the developed countries, they are consuming enormously. They are buying bigger cars, houses, and this trend is even being followed by the third world countries. As they become developed, they will also become more soul sick, that is buying increasingly, consuming a lot without any thought of how it will affect the environment. So the summary of this passage will be that as the consumption increases, more consumption will be harmful to the environment. More consumption It's bad for environment. Author doesn't support consuming enormously. Okay, let's look at the fourth paragraph. Imagine everyone on the planet worked together to care for the resources and shared them, so no one went without adequate food or water or shelter. There are no separate countries. Instead, there is a global consciousness of one world where unity, harmony and peace prevail. In this alternative world, scientists focus on discovering new renewable resources and life-giving solutions to health concerns. The economy is based on helping people rather than hurting people. Animals and plants are revered and the population feels a part of the life cycle rather than the dominator of it. Unlike planet Earth now, where wars and poverty and cruelty to humanity, the animals and the environment prevail, this new world is peaceful, abundant and conscious to the underlying interconnectedness of all beings. There is a profound understanding that if you hurt one, you hurt all. Fear and greed are not the driving forces, and instead life is honored and united. In this paragraph, the author is describing an ideal world. She is describing how if each of us transform, how the ideal world will look like. She says that in this peaceful world, there is no concept of countries. She says everyone is united by a global consciousness called as one world, where everyone is living in unity, harmony and peace. And then she says that scientists focus their energy on developing renewable resources. We are mindful about the environment. We discover life-giving solutions. She also says that we spend our economy on helping people rather than hurting. So if you subtly observe what she is trying to imply, she implies that we don't spend hugely on, say, defense or developing the latest missile technology which will hurt people. Rather, we spend money on developing people, empowering people. She is also not satisfied that we are considered as the dominator of species. We take other species for granted. She is not satisfied about that. She says everyone should be revered and treated equally. And then she goes on to say that today the world is torn by wars, poverty, and instead we should move towards a new world that is peaceful and abundant. So she is describing an ideal world. In this passage, she describes an ideal world where we are peaceful, united, and ultimately we will reach, it will lead to prosperity. Peaceful, united, this will lead to prosperity. Let's look at the last paragraph. Perhaps this is just a utopian idea that we may never see, but we cannot give up on the inherent goodness of human nature and the earth's ability to renew herself. So utopian basically means it is modeled on a perfect state, an ideal state. How we picturize an ideal state. So the author says that maybe this is too ideal, but again she goes on to say we cannot give up on the inherent goodness. She believes that humans are inherently good and we can be hopeful of creating this sort of world. Everyone I interviewed, both young and old, felt that it is not too late to turn things around. They each cited examples of alternative energy sources and innovative ideas of sustainability. We have to remember that each of us truly does make a difference in our world. So the author is hopeful, she is optimistic that we can turn things around. She says that although utopian, humans are inherently good. We can be optimistic. In this last line, she says that each of us can truly contribute towards changing the world. What we do might seem like very small, but on the whole, it will have a huge effect. If many of us follow such principles, we try to change, it will have a huge effect on the system. For instance, Costco now sells organic food because that is what people want to buy. As we change and alter how we spend our time and money, we change our society, our economics and our environment. We are the quantum shift in creating a sustainable world. In the conclusive lines, the author says that people can drive the change. She quotes the example of Costco. She says that even though organic food is more expensive, they are selling it today. They are selling because people want it. Each of us, we changed, and accordingly, even the corporates, they got adjusted to it. So she is quoting the example of Costco to say that people can drive the change. What we do individually will contribute towards the society in a bigger manner. That is what she is trying to say. Let's look at the questions now. What is the central idea of the passage? So what is the central idea? If you look at the entire passage, initially she says there is energy, there is environmental crisis. Then she says that we need to, each of us should transform individually. Then she describes sustainability. Then she describes an ideal world, how it is ideal world and how we can achieve it. She is also hopeful. So it is more or less leading towards how we can achieve sustainability as a humankind, all of us, how we can individually contribute to it. Are we moving towards a sustainable? So it is not a question about are we moving, what is happening. She is saying we should move. She is rather giving an opinion. So this doesn't look like a good option. Option B says role of individuals in taking Earth towards a sustainable world. This looks like a good option. That is what we are trying to say. How each of us can contribute towards sustainable world. Let's keep it aside. Option C says the impact of human activities on the ecological balance of nature. So ecological balance, they have said that we are destroying the world by exploiting the resources, we are dominating other species, but these are facts. She is driving the point that we should rather change the world. She is optimistic that we can change the world by individual transformation. This is not the central point, and also they are not describing the impact. They are just saying that these things are bad. What humans are doing with resources, environment, other species, that is bad. This is not a good option. Option D says sustainability of Earth and the factors on which it depends. So sustainability they discuss, and they discuss how we can achieve it, how individual can achieve it, what are the factors it depends on. It is not a descriptive passage as such. So option B looks better than this. So certainly option B is a good option. Let's look at the next question. What can be inferred about the present stage of Earth from reading a passage? So about the current state we see in two places. Initially here they say that resources are being depleted at an alarming rate and the future of the planet looks increasingly bleak. We are at a tipping point. And also in this paragraph, unlike planet Earth now, where wars, poverty and cruelty to animals, humanity and the environment prevail. So here they are saying that we are cruel towards environment, and in this first point they say that resources are being depleted in a huge number and we are at a tipping point. Let's see which one captures that. Option A says global warming is changing the environment of the Earth. We as humans have a responsibility to take Earth on a path of sustainable development. Second part of the sentence is on point, but first part says global warming. There is no mention of global warming. Here we see that resources are being depleted. So that is putting our planet at risk. There is no mention of global warming. It is out of scope. So it is out. Option B says poverty and wars are very common on the present day Earth, that we saw where today's Earth, poverty, wars and cruelty to humanity, animals and environment. The developing countries are in constant conflicts with the developed countries over the utilization of resources. This is again out of context, out of scope of paragraph. Here they say that if third world countries they develop, they are also going to consume and spend more like the developed countries. That is going to affect the environment. They don't say incite any conflict between developed or developing countries. This is again out of scope. We can eliminate it. Option C says the resources are depleted and scientists are not able to come up with the alternative sources. Again, this is also not mentioned in paragraph. Here he says that in the ideal world, scientists will focus their energy on discovering new renewable resources, life-giving solutions, but she doesn't say that they are unable to find alternative sources. This is again wrong. Option D says the selfish and greedy nature of people has pushed the Earth into a crisis situation where war and poverty is a common sight. We already saw war and poverty is common sight. Here he says that we are all selfish right now. We should move away from greedy selfishness towards inclusive generosity. So we can infer that people are selfish and greedy, and we have pushed Earth to a crisis situation where war and poverty is common sight, and we are not respectful to the environment. We already saw that the author says that we are cruel towards environment, humanity and people. So we can infer that as well. So all the three things in this point can be inferred. So it is a correct answer. Let's look at the next question. Which of the following correctly represents the author's thoughts towards the future of the Earth? Indifferent. Is the author being indifferent means you are unconcerned or lack of sympathy. The author is highly concerned about environment. So we can never say indifferent. Optimistic, certainly. Towards the conclusive, she says, even though it is an utopian idea, we can be optimistic. She says, although utopian, humans are inherently good and we can hope to build such a world. So we can keep optimistic. Skeptic. So is she skeptic? So initially in this paragraph, she quotes that resources are being depleted and we are at a tipping point. She is giving facts here. She is not saying that there is no future for the world. Towards the end, she concludes that although all these facts are there, we are at a tipping point, we can be hopeful of building a better world. So she is not skeptic. Option D says concerned. She is definitely concerned. She is concerned about the future of Earth. She is concerned about the environment. But if you look at the conclusive lines, See, conclusive lines drive the mood of the author, what she wants to convey. So here she is optimistic. She says that humans are inherently good and we can work collectively, we can work towards building such a world. So she is being optimistic in the final lines. And also when you say concerned, if she is concerned, she doesn't know what will happen to Earth. Either it will be good or bad. But clearly towards the end, she is saying that we can be hopeful of building a better world. So optimistic is a better option here. Let's look at the next question. Which one of the following statements can be inferred from the passage? Community in Moy cite the example of Tesla to show that the world is selfish and cannot work in harmony. Here there are two members who speak. One of the members says that if we bring in something like universal currency, the entire world can be sustainable. And one more member quotes the example of Tesla, how his cheap way of transmitting electricity was not implemented for selfish motives, for economic interests. So the problem with this is, here they are generalizing. Community in Moy, they are saying that the entire community feels that the world is selfish. So this was opinion of one person. Clearly there was one more person who was hopeful, who was saying that if we have universal currency, everyone can make the world sustainable. And again, cannot work in harmony. We cannot infer this. We can maybe infer that world is selfish. But how can we infer cannot work in harmony? There is clearly one person who is saying that we can make the world sustainable by introducing something like universal currency. So this option is out. Option B says the author is optimistic about the world as some corporates are voluntarily shifting towards sustainable models. So there is only one corporate that comes in. They give the example of Costco. They say that Costco now sells organic foods because that is what people want to buy. As we change and alter how we spend our time and money, we change our society. So the author is saying that people are pushing towards this change. People wanted organic food, that is why these big corporates are adapting and they are selling organic food. They are not voluntarily shifting to better models, voluntarily shifting to sustainable models. Instead, people are pushing towards it. So again, this is also wrong. This voluntarily word makes it wrong. Option C says the world at its current pace of consumption will be unsustainable. So we see it in two places. The author says we are at a tipping point. For our world to become sustainable, humanity needs to make a huge transformation. And also in these lines, she says that consumption, we are making consumption exceptionally, and even the underdeveloped countries or the third world countries, when they rapidly develop, they will also become soul sick, buy and consume more and more without any thought of the environmental costs. So combining both, we can infer that if you continue consumption rapidly as the developed countries do, then it will make the world unsustainable. So we can reasonably infer this. Let's look at statement D. Many people in the existing world are soul sick, self-centered and difficult to refine. We can clearly infer soul sick. If third world countries develop, even they too are becoming more soul sick. So already many people in the developed countries, they are soul sick. And in first paragraph, she says that we should move away from greedy selfishness towards inclusive generosity. So many of us were selfish, self-centered, and then difficult to refine. This we cannot infer in the entire paragraph. In fact, towards the end, she is hopeful that we can change the world around. Each of us will make our individual contribution that will lead to a huge change. So we cannot say difficult to refine. This makes the option wrong. So the correct option is answer C. Which of the following statements is the author not likely to agree with? What will he not agree with? Although humans are inherently selfish, we can work together to build a better world. So we already summarized the last paragraph. In the last paragraph, she says that although this idea of the ideal world is utopian, humans are inherently good. So we can be optimistic. So she says that in these lines, she says, cannot give up on the inherent goodness of human nature. But here they are saying that humans are inherently selfish. They are selfish. Currently the world is selfish, but inherently humans are good. So this is false misappropriation. So we can keep it aside. This looks like the correct answer. Option B says humans have dominated over other species. This has been clearly paraphrased. Here the author says animals and plants are revered and the population feels a part of the life cycle rather than the dominator of it. So she is suggesting that currently we are dominating other species and plants. So humans have dominated. This is correct. She will agree with it. Today's world with its exhausting resources is at a brink of collapse. This is also right. We are at a tipping point. Resources are exhausting very fast. We are at a tipping point. Option D says sustainability is hindered even if one of its pillars is compromised. So there are three pillars of sustainability. One is economic, environment and people. Let's say even if one of them is, each of whom can either contribute or detract from the goal of sustainability, that is establishing human ecosystem equilibrium. Let's say one of them falters, then achieving becoming sustainable becomes more and more difficult. That is, it hinders. Sustainability is hindered even if one of its pillar says compromised. So certainly you'll agree with this. All three of them, if they work in confluence like in the Moi community, then true sustainability is achieved. So option A is the correct answer. Let's look at the last question. Which of the following establishments comes closest to the idea of creating a utopian world? Okay, in this passage, this is the paragraph where the author speaks about how an ideal world or utopian world will look like. So let's look at the options. Which establishment will not fit into this word? Option A says not-for-profit defense agency in order to secure people and borders. So if you read closely, the author says we need to focus on renewable energy, life-giving solutions. The economy is based on helping people rather than hurting people. So naturally, if you take defense agency, they build missiles, they build various tankers and all those things to defend the country. So there is no need for this in a peaceful world. In fact, he goes on to say there will be no wars or there won't be poverty, everyone will be peaceful and everything will be abundant. So there is no need for a defense agency. So this is out. Then an oil company that holds each of its employee accountable to their share of resources and makes them aware about mindful consumption. So all this is good, but it is at its core, it is an oil company. So clearly the author says we should research renewable resources. So oil is non-renewable resources. At its core, there is a fundamental flaw. But again, he never says that we should ban all the oil companies or it should not exist. He doesn't speak in those lights. So we can keep it in contention. Let's look at option C. A livestock industry that promotes an ambitious plan of mass reforestation. So what is livestock industry? It produces various products including meat. So here he says we should revere animals and plants, and then he also says that wars, poverty and cruelty to humanity and animals. He is not supporting cruelty to humanity, animals and environment. So clearly producing meat, it will involve cruelty to animals. So we can disregard option C as well. Option D says highly profitable consumer goods company which advocates mindful consumption. So consumer goods are basically FMCG companies which are like fast moving goods. There are a lot of products produced. Here he speaks about consumption. He says that as third world companies develop, if they also consume a lot like developed countries, that is going to have huge impact on environment. So this consumer goods company, they are advocating mindful consumption. So the issue with consumer goods is that will lead to a lot of consumption. So they are curtailing that. And highly profitable. There is never in an ideal world, they doesn't say that corporate should not be profitable. There is no mention of that. So there is no issue with this option. If you compare with this B has a slight hitch when you say oil company because it is not renewable. So option D, there is no problem. It looks like a better option. So certainly we can choose option D. The secret to crack CAT is taking a lot of marks. We at Kraku give all the previous year's CAT, XAT and IFT papers in the actual exam format. Also, if you just Google Kraku free CAT mark, you can find 3 free CAT marks in the latest exam pattern. You can take them and get detailed analysis. Controlling the minds of others from a distance has long been a favorite science fiction theme, but recent advances in genetics and neuroscience suggest that we might soon have that power for real. Just over a decade ago, the bioengineer Carl Diceroth and his colleagues at Stanford University published their paper on their optical control of the brain, now known as optogenetics, in which the firing patterns of neurons is controlled by light. To create the system, they retrofitted neurons in mouse brains with genes from a biomolecule called channelrhodopsin found in algae. Channelrhodopsin uses energy from light to open pathways so that charged ions can flow into cells. The charged ions can alter the electrical activity of neurons, influencing the animal's behavior along the way. First part of the paragraph is talking about a new advancement in the field of genetics and neuroscience. That is, they are calling it as controlling the mind. So how we can control someone's mind from a distance. And then they talk about one of the techniques of controlling the mind, that is called as optogenetics. Optogenetics, in which the firing pattern of neurons is controlled by light. So if you are you are not a biology student, you don't know what is neurons are firing. In our body there are about 86 billion neurons. They are mostly concentrated in our head. Let's say neurons basically have two modes. One is firing mode and one is non-firing, or let's say off mode. 0 and 1, you can consider it as 0 and 1. Let's say you trigger a specific 10,000 set of neurons, then some action is produced. If you have seen the movie of Kung Fu Panda, the doctor, he triggers a set of neurons, his hand goes up or his leg goes up or his mouth opens up. So that is what they are trying to say when they say controlling the mind or controlling someone else's action. So these are the two, the neurons are either fired or they are not fired. So here what they say is optogenetics, in which the firing pattern of neurons is controlled by light. To create the system, they retrofitted neurons in mouse brains with genes for a biomolecule called channel rhodopsin. So they are saying in mice they have gene edited neurons. What do these gene edited neurons do? They produce a biomolecule called as channel rhodopsin. To create the system, they retrofitted neurons in mouse brains with genes for a biomolecule called channel rhodopsins. So these these genes, so these neurons have a new gene in them. So what does this gene do? That produces a biomolecule called as channel rhodopsins. These gene edited neurons, they can produce something called as channel rhodopsin. This channel rhodopsin uses energy from light to open pathways so that charged ions can flow into cells. The charged ions can alter the electric activity. Okay, so this will take energy from light. Let's say it will you shine light on these channel rhodopsin molecules. They take energy from light, and as a result they open pathways for ions to be. So this is basically when they say that uses energy from light to open pathways so that charged ions can flow into the cells. When charged ions flow into cell, that is nothing but firing. That is, there is a electrical current, there is some sort of impulse moving through. Charged ions are moving, that is, it is in firing state. So it opens pathway for firing to happen. As a result of opening pathways, the neuron will fire. Firing will happen, and due to this firing, you can control the animal behavior. So the crux of the first para is, they are saying that in mice they have introduced gene edited neurons. These neurons have the capability of producing a biomolecule called as channel rhodopsin. These channel rhodopsin, they take, when you shine light on them, they take the energy from light and open pathways. By opening pathways, what happens? The neurons go into the firing stage. When you fire different set of neurons, you can alter different animal behavior. That is the first paragraph. Let's look at the second paragraph. Soon, researchers were using implants to guide light to channel rhodopsin in specific neurons in the brains of those mice, eliciting behavior on demand. So you want to shine light on channel rhodopsin. So basically, you will use implants for them. Certain mechanical implants in our brain or different parts of the body, so that they can shine light on this biomolecule channel rhodopsin. At the University of California, the team of Anatol Kreitzer worked with Diceroth to disrupt movement, okay, mimicking Parkinson's disease and even restoring normal movement in a Parkinsonian mouse. Diceroth and his colleague Louis De Lecca later demonstrated that it was possible to wake up mice by activating a group of neurons in the brain that control arousal and sleep. These researchers, they came together and they are demonstrating the advantage of this technique called as optogenetics. They are showing how it can be used. One such advantage they show is about Parkinson's disease. What is Parkinson's disease? If you look at people with old age, they are usually very slow, they are very stiff, their body is very lean. That is what makes Parkinson's disease, makes you very stiff. So they are saying that in a mice which has Parkinson's disease, they can illustrate a normal movement, they can make it to move normally, or a mice which can move normally, they can make it to move in a very stiff manner. That, and they also say that a mice which is asleep, they are able to wake up using this technique. So they are giving examples of how this animal behavior can be modified. They give two examples. One is where they say that normal movement, Parkinsonian movement. The second example they give is about waking up from sleep. Wake up the mice. Okay, let's look at the third paragraph. But optogenetics has been challenging. Since light does not easily penetrate dense fatty brain tissue, researchers must implant a fiber optic cable to bring light into the brain. So again, brain is extremely dense, lots of neurons. So if you want to shine light on specific neurons, then it's very difficult. That's what they are saying. One of the challenges. These implants are of the type optic fiber implants. This is one of the challenges they are saying. This is a challenges. The limitations led to the development of another less intrusive technique known as DRED. So because of these challenges, you are looking at another technique called as DREAD. What is DREAD? DREAD stands for Designer Receptors Exclusively Activated by Designer Drugs. Designer receptors exclusively activated by designer drugs. The name itself is very suggestive. In this case, a receptor normally activated by the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is modified to respond to a designer drug not normally found in the body. When the designer drug is delivered, neurons can be manipulated and behavior changed over a number of hours. The major drawback here is the slow course of drug administration compared with the rapid changes in brain activity that occur during most tasks. Let's consider a network of neurons. Let's say there is a network of neurons. Each neuron has a receptor. Each neuron has a receptor which is triggered by something called as a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. This acetylcholine will bind to this receptor. As a result, the neuron is fired. So these receptors play the major role of initiating the firing of the neurons. But what they are saying is they modify these receptors itself. These receptors are modified so that designer drugs can attach to them and you can induce firing. We will read it again so you can understand. Normally activated by neurotransmitter acetylcholine is modified. These receptors are modified. As a result, designer drugs will attach to them and then firing can be induced. This technique can be summarized by saying modified receptors plus modified receptors you administer designer drugs, that is lab manufactured drugs. These designer drugs attach to modified receptors. As a result, you will induce firing or you control the animal behavior as and when you want. There is one disadvantage to this, and that is it takes number of hours. It takes some time for the drug to be delivered to that receptor and then the action to happen. So that is one disadvantage. Disadvantage is it is slow. Let's look at the next paragraph. In the past couple of years, researchers have pioneered a newer technique using low frequency radio waves or a magnetic field, both of which can penetrate the body without causing much damage. Okay, the waves serve to heat iron oxide nanoparticles injected or genetically targeted to the body region of interest. In a process similar to optogenetics, the heated nanoparticles open an ion channel called TRPV, transient receptor potential vanilloid, allowing calcium ions into the cell. Depending on the location of the nanoparticles, the ions might accomplish any number of tasks, from releasing insulin to suppressing the gastric hormones involved in the feelings of hunger. Until now, we saw two different techniques. One was optogenetics, where you use light to fire the neurons. The second one was DREAD, where you use designer drugs. And now they are talking about third one. Here what you do is you use waves, low frequency radio waves. These radio waves tend to heat. What do they heat? They heat the iron oxide nanoparticles. Let's say iron oxide nanoparticles. They heat these iron oxide nanoparticles, but how are these iron oxide nanoparticles? They are either, how are they present? That is, they are either injected or they are genetically targeted. That is, genetically modified. They are introduced by genetic modification. So they are either injected or genetically modified. As a result of getting heated, they gain energy, and then similar to the optogenetics process, they open various pathways, and then they say that calcium ions move in. That is nothing but firing. So open pathways and then firing happens, and then you can control the animal behavior. And here they give two examples how you can control animal behavior. First, they say that releasing insulin. Insulin, if you know, it is released in pancreas. So you can control the release of insulin, or otherwise you can control the feelings of hunger. This is beautiful. If someone wants to do diet, then you can do the diet also, and you don't have the feeling of hunger as well. So let's say I'll give you a practical example. Let's say you want to pick up my hand, you want to lift my hand without my voluntary effort. So there are bunch of neurons here. Let's say some 100 millions of neurons which needs to be fired for my hand to be picked up. What do? You either inject these nanoparticles, and then you heat them using a wave, or you genetically modify me, you modify my gene so that it produces these nanoparticles, and when waves pass through it, the magnetic field waves pass through it, then as a result firing happens, and then you get out the desired output. That is, you can control the insulin production, or you can control the feelings of hunger. This is the third technique that they talk about. Okay, let's look at the penultimate paragraph. It seems only a matter of time before we use similar technology to treat neurological and mental health problems originating in the brain. Toward this end, some researchers are working with gold nanoparticles which when exposed to special light can generate enough heat to make a neuron fire without the need to alter its genes. They are talking about another technique, that is where you use gold particles with light, but the advantage here they are saying is you need not, gene editing is not required, gene modification is not required, and they also say that this technique is beneficial. Over time all these methods will be beneficial to mankind. Last paragraph says more research is needed, but these systems are potentially more precise and less invasive than existing techniques for altering brain activity such as deep brain simulation. So understand this carefully. They are saying that these techniques, that is the optogenetics or the DRED technique or the wave technique, all these techniques he is saying that they are precise and less invasive. He is saying the existing systems currently today, that is deep, something called, he gives one example, deep brain simulation, these are less precise or more invasive. So the one point is current systems are more invasive and less precise. Current systems are more invasive and less precise. Last sentence is, with so much progress on a variety of fronts, some form of human mind control and the treatments and benefits it confers should be here before long. It will be beneficial and it will be here soon. Okay, let's look at the questions now. All of the following statements are true about optogenetics except it can be used to change the behavior of the subject. That is right, we saw it here. The charged ions can alter the electrical activity of neurons, influencing the animal's behavior along the way. So this is correct. It can be potentially used to treat Parkinson's disease. They also illustrate how it can be potentially used. Here they say that you can use to wake up a mice that is sleeping. They also say how a Parkinsonian mice can be made to walk like a normal mice, or a normal mice can be made to walk with a stiff movement. So this is also right. It changes the activity of neurons with the help of ions. So if you remember here, these molecules, the biomolecule will take light, it takes its energy and it opens a pathway. When the pathway is opened up, the ions move. Ions like say calcium, sodium, chloride, all these ions move. These movement of ions is what causes the firing. That is what puts it in the firing states. So this is correct. It changes the activity of neurons with the help of ions. That is right. It is more even invasive technique than the ones we use at present. So here we just saw that current systems are more invasive and less precise. We saw it in the last paragraph here. Here we see that more research is needed, but these systems, that is the optogenetics, they are also talking about optogenetics, the wave technique, the DRED technique, they are potentially more precise and less invasive. They are less invasive. But here he says that it is the optogenetics is more invasive than we use present. So it is directly contradicting the paragraph. So it is the correct option. Let's look at the second question. Which of the following is one of the differences between optogenetics and DRED as mentioned in the passage? Option A says optogenetics uses a biomolecule called channel rhodopsin to guide the light for altering the brain activity. Does channel rhodopsin guide the light? We saw that channel rhodopsin, it uses the energy from light and then opens up pathways to guide the light for altering the brain activity, while DRED uses acetylcholine for the same. Does DRED use acetylcholine? If we look at the abbreviation of DRED, that itself is sufficing. Designer receptors exclusively activated by designer drugs. It is activated by designer drug. This is the natural neurotransmitter. The alternative or a designer drug will activate the receptor, not acetylcholine. So both the statements are wrong. So it is naturally wrong. Optogenetics uses genes for channel rhodopsin to create systems necessary to control neuron firing. So they are saying channel rhodopsin creates systems that will enable firing. That is right. It takes in light and it does not directly enable firing. It opens pathways. As a result of opening pathway, firing will happen. So the first part of statement is correct. DRED uses drugs to do the same. Although it is very very general, not very specific, but it's correct. It uses drugs to do the same. Let's say be it designer drugs or whatever, it is correct. So the statement, both of them look correct. C says that the rapid change of brain activity is a major challenge for optogenetics, while the slow response for drugs is a drawback for DRED. Here we clearly see that the author says the slow course of drug administration, that is a challenge, but it never says that rapid movement of brain activity is a challenge for rapid change of brain activity is challenge for optogenetics. This is not mentioned. And also if you want to control the actions of someone, let's say you want to lift my hand by some control. If you give a command, then it should happen immediately. If it happens after 4 hours, then there is no point. And moreover, the first part of the sentence is not mentioned anywhere in the passage, so this is clearly out. Optogenetics uses implants to guide light into brain. That part of the sentence is correct. Implants let light into the brain. While DRED uses modification of neurotransmitters using drugs. They are saying the neurotransmitter itself is modified. They are saying that there is a replacement for neurotransmitters. If you read carefully, designer drugs, like you are finding an alternative for acetylcholine, you are not modifying acetylcholine. You can say replacement of neurotransmitters. You are not modifying the neurotransmitters. Also, he says uses your modification of neurotransmitters using drugs. This is totally off. The correct statement is option B. Let's look at the third question. The research done by Carl Diceroth and his colleagues does not involve. The research done by them is Diceroth name populates twice here, the first 2 paragraphs, that is the optogenetics. It does not involve using a special light to generate heat. So, using light to generate heat, we came across the heat term in case of wave, when you pass the wave over the iron oxide nanoparticles. In case of optogenetics, the light is shined over the biomolecule, that is channel rhodopsin. It opens pathways and firing will happen, and then they gave various benefits, various illustration that they did. One is Parkinson movement, one is the waking up of the mice. This generating heat will keep it in contention. It doesn't look right. Changing neurons activity by genetically modifying them. That is what, right at the start of the chain, we use gene edited neurons. As a result of it, towards the end, you get the firing and the animal behavior is changed. So, this statement is correct. Correcting abnormal behavior. Here they say that you can control animal behavior. They also illustrate that you can use it for Parkinson disease. So, you can use it to correct abnormal behavior. This also we can infer. Controlling the activity of brains using a biomolecule. This is also right. You are using biomolecule called as channel rhodopsin. As a result, you are changing the brain activity, or you are changing the final animal behavior, final outcome. Controlling the activity of brains. That is right. So, the correct option is option A. Let's look at the fourth question. Which of the following statements is most suitable to complete the paragraph? So, last paragraph it spoke about how existing systems are more invasive, they are less precise, and then finally he says that in upcoming times he is hopeful, he has a positive tone. He says that in upcoming times there will be more practical benefits for this. He says, he is concluding by saying that there will be more, we can expect more practical benefits. What can come after this? So, ideally if you take a conclusion, the conclusion, it should be related to the entire paragraph. It should be related to the entire passage, related to passage, in the sense that you give various arguments, you make various suggestions, and then you drive towards a conclusion. It shouldn't be a new information. Conclusion should be related to the paragraph. It shouldn't be new information, and it shouldn't also be very specific. It should be a generic information. Based on all the observation, you will make a generic conclusion. Shouldn't be specific either. Let's keep that in mind. Let's look at the options here. What's evident is that these techniques are the only way to find out how the brain works. Is this the central idea? Is he saying that this is the only way? This is a new idea. In fact, in the entire paragraph, it has not been said that this is the only way to find out how the brain works. So, it's off. However, if governments find a way to control these systems, it would get scary for the general population. See, this might be a fact, this might be correct, but it is a new information, as well as it has not been mentioned across the passage. So, it is not a good conclusion. That is also out. We just need to make sure that, like other emerging technologies, they are used for good to improve lives. So, this is a generic statement. This is something you can apply in general. They are saying that first it will say that they will have a lot of practical benefits, and then he concludes by saying that we should be cautious about it. That is a good advice. Looks like a good option. You can keep it in contention. Option D says, given our limited biological cognitive abilities, it is essential that we develop a safe and robust mind control system to keep pace with rapid generation of knowledge. So, as soon as you see so much of jargons, it should tick you off. Even otherwise, he says that given our limited biological cognitive abilities. In the passage, there is no mention that our cognitive abilities, we have limited cognitive abilities. And then he goes on to say that we need a robust mind control system, since there is heaps of knowledge available. There is no such language. They have not said that we need a robust mind control system. And also, this is very specific. The conclusion should be very generic, sort of an advice like option C, where they say that there are a lot of practical benefits, but we should also be cautious while moving in that direction. So this is also out. The correct answer is option C. Let's look at the final question. Which of the following is consistent with the information mentioned in the passage? Optogenetics is more invasive than the technique that uses radio waves for changing brain activity. So here we see that they describe optogenetics as very invasive. They say that since light does not easily penetrate dense fatty tissue, researchers must implant a fiber optic cable, and then they say that lesser intrusive technique is DRED. So they are inferring, we can infer from that is optogenetics is very invasive technique, and in this passage the author goes on to say that low frequency radio waves or magnetic field, both of which can penetrate the body without causing damage. So there is very less intrusion or lesser damage. So here we can infer that optogenetics technique is very invasive. Here we can infer that it doesn't cause much damage. So using both of those information, clearly you can say that optogenetics is more invasive than the technique of radio waves. So 1 is correct. Ions can be used to activate receptors to change the brain activity. So if you read carefully here, they say that in the DRED technique, usually what happens, receptors are activated by the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, but instead of that you use a designer drug to activate it. As a result of it, ions move in the channel in the neuron, and that is what is firing. So basically there is a set of neurons, each neuron has a receptor. These receptors are activated by acetylcholine or a designer drug. As a result of it, ions move through the neuron, and not that these ions will trigger the receptor. So that is wrong. If it was that, if instead of ions they had said that a designer drug or acetylcholine, then the statement would have been correct. So this is wrong. Statement 3 says channel rhodopsin or calcium ions can help in opening channels for ions to flow. So again, channel rhodopsin, here we saw that channel rhodopsin will help in opening channels, and then neurons will be fired. That is correct. And then calcium ions can help in opening channels. In fact, calcium ions themselves, they move through the channels. They are not helping in opening channels. As a result of the channels opening, calcium, sodium, potassium, these ions move through the neuron. That is what is firing. So they don't enable opening of channels. Again, this is also wrong. Statement 4 says iron oxide nanoparticles can be used to control the hunger. This also we can see here. Here they say that the iron oxide nanoparticles injected or genetically targeted to the body region of interest. Say these particles are introduced in my hand, and then by using the wave through the low frequency waves or the magnetic field, it generates heat. It heats up the iron oxide particles. As a result of it, firing will happen. As a result, they say that there are two advantages of this, two specific advantages they give. One is you can control the insulin, or you can control the feelings of hunger, suppressing the gastric hormones involved in hunger. So naturally you can say that using these iron oxide nanoparticles can be used to control the hunger. That is right. So statement 4 is also correct. The correct option is D, 1, 4.